Welcome back to my World of Warcraft deep dive series. If you're new here, I've been playing WoW for almost 20 years, but I've still never properly experienced most of the early leveling zones all the way through. I'm a huge fan of the lore in this game, and I also believe that one of the best ways to learn something is to try and teach somebody else about it. So that's what I'm doing here today. I have played through the entirety of Blade's Edge Mountains, focusing on the questing and story, how it ties into the Burning Crusade zones preceding it, and how it holds up in modern retail WoW as we approach the release of Midnight. Don't worry, you don't have to have seen the other videos in this series for this one to make sense. There will be lots of little refreshers and reminders of what we got up to in previous zones along the way. Similarly, you don't have to know a lot about WoW lore to get this video. I'm experiencing a lot of these stories for the first time, so I'll be doing my best to explain everything in a super beginner-friendly way. All I knew going into Blade's Edge Mountains is that it was brown, it was spiky, and a lot of people considered it to be the worst of the Burning Crusade zones, if not out of all zones in WoW. Obviously, this is a very subjective thing, as is the case with pretty much everything in this game. And I say that as someone who genuinely enjoyed the bits of Shadowlands that I actually played. But if you go on forums and tier lists and rankings, you'll pretty much always find Blade's Edge Mountains relegated to the bottom of the heap. So my main question going into this was, why? Why is this considered such a bad zone? And is it actually a bad zone? Or are people hating for no reason? If you've seen the other videos in this series, then you'll know that I tend to gravitate towards appreciation rather than critique. And in this video, I will hopefully be able to convince you to give Blade's Edge Mountains another chance, as I truly do believe that there is a lot going for the zone, and I mean, spoiler alert, but it is currently sitting pretty high on my overall Burning Crusade ranking. But before we can jump into the lore and all the rest, let me introduce you to our two adventurers. Zerylin, the Draenei Restoration Shaman, and Loriandril, the Blood Elf Arcane Mage. I forgot to introduce them in the last video, and I feel really bad about it. Our poor guys didn't get their time in the spotlight. Anyway, fun fact about Zerylin, he actually got a bit of a haircut between the Terakar and Nagrand videos. And a fun fact about Loriandril, he gave Zerylin that haircut. I think they're officially friends now. They've bonded enough where they've gone from enemies to friends, and we'll see where they go from there. They're both looking very snazzy in their Blade's Edge Mountains themed transmogs. And hey, if you're someone who's interested in transmog, I have another series called Azeroth's Next Top Model, where I am making random transmogs in game based on audience suggestions. It's very cool, and you should maybe check it out if you want some more lighthearted WoW content on the regular. Anyway, let's get into the story. Previously in these videos, I have taken you through the story chapters created in-game one by one, explaining the quest lines as I played them. But Blade's Edge Mountains is a little bit complicated in its quest design. There are often cases where storylines and narratives are intertwining, and the Alliance and Horde timelines get a little bit muddled. So today, I've made my own story chapters. What? This is a bold new phase of this series that we're entering now, and I hope you're ready. I'm going to tell you about what I see as the main storylines of this zone. Along the way, introducing you to some very important characters and factions and locations, as well as delving into this zone's raid. As always, there might be a few things that I get wrong in this video. My goal in this series is to deep dive into the story as presented in the questing experience in-game, bringing in other bits of lore and context where needed. But those extra bits of lore are often not things I've experienced firsthand, usually being from the OG Warcraft games or the novels. So feel free to correct me about anything that I get wrong in the comments, or add any more information that you know or find interesting about any of these stories. Also, One last thing before we get into it, I promise. I normally end these videos by giving a list of everything that I loved about the zone and my experience playing it, but this zone just had so much going on and the script was getting very long, so I'll be doing that little bit as a separate video. Hopefully that'll also give me a bit more time to waffle on about everything that I loved and provide a bit more WoW content on this channel between these bigger videos. So stay tuned for that. All throughout our adventures in Outland, we have been constantly running into the Cenarion Expedition. If you recall, this is the group of Cenarion Circle druids from both the Horde and Alliance who have travelled through the Dark Portal to learn more about the flora and fauna of Outland. However, each time we've encountered them, it seemed more and more like their efforts have turned from discovery instead to conservation. In Zangarmarsh, they were concerned with the rapid draining of the area's lakes and subsequent corruption of the local bog lords and other aquatic creatures. In Terakar, we saw revenge being enacted upon them as an entire town of druids was bombed in retaliation for interfering with Kael'thas Sunstrider's dodgy, corrupted crystal experiments. And here in Blade's Edge, we find the Cenarion Expedition attempting to breathe some proper life back into this otherwise barren landscape. The expedition has founded 2 villages, Sylvanar and Evergrove, with Sylvanar actually only being open to the Alliance. Both towns are honestly gorgeous. I'm very fond of both of them as they're both built with the real old school night elf architecture that you don't see as much of these days in a post-Belemeth WoW. Both villages are also located within 2 of the higher plateaus within the zone, untouched by the ogre menace and thus full of trees and wildlife. Before playing through this zone, I actually had no idea that areas like this existed within the mountains, but there's actually 5 different plateaus like this tucked away between the towering spikes and the dusty canyon. And the expedition are working hard to keep these areas as sort of like eco-sanctuaries, growing more trees and stopping poachers, and also, interestingly, using their druidic magic to control and contain animals, such as lynxes. This really surprised me at first because I expected the druids to be more in favour of letting nature take its course without interfering. But after talking to them for a little bit, it's clear that they're implementing this control because they want to keep not just their towns safe, but also the other creatures in what they're calling the Living Grove. It's like they've introduced a predator into the ecosystem to keep the circle of life going, yada yada, but are needing to make sure that that then doesn't get out of hand. The main reason I found this interesting is because you can draw a comparison to another instance of specifically lynxes being controlled through magical means. This time it's the Blood Elves back on Sunstrider Isle. One of the very first quests that a new Blood Elf is sent on involves culling a number of lynxes that are no longer under the magical control of the Blood Elves, thanks to all their issues with magic and sunwells and arcane addiction. I thought it was really interesting to see another case of this magical control over animals, right down to it being specifically lynxes, but having it done for 2 very different reasons. The Cenarion Expedition are wanting to build a thriving ecosystem and return some long-dead life to an otherwise barren landscape, whereas the Blood Elves, I think, mostly have the lynxes there for aesthetic reasons. Like, I'm pretty sure that's the implication. It ties in with how the entirety of Eversong Woods is magically locked in eternal springtime. It's a very carefully crafted, aesthetically pleasing environment meant to convey austerity and splendor. I found that interesting. At least. As we lend a hand to the expedition, we begin to learn of some quite suspicious activity originating from the nearby Arakkoa. We talked about the Arakkoa quite a bit in the Terakar Forest video, but as a quick refresher, they are bird people, essentially, who we often find getting up to some dodgy, dark magic and generally causing a bit of a ruckus. And what do you know, that's exactly what they're doing here. There are 4 different Arakkoa camps throughout the mountains. Vale Lash, Vale Ruan, Vale Vec, and Grishnath. It's the odd one out. When we're sent to investigate the Arakkoa at Vale Lash, we find that they're doing some very unnatural magic, using their own feathers as, like, spell components, which is turning it kind of into like a strange sort of necromancy, which is not really the Cenarion Expedition's cup of tea, as you could probably expect. Despite gathering some of the feathers and actually attempting to cast one of these spells ourselves, we can't quite figure out what this strange magic is and why it's being used. All we can divine is that one of the spell books we find shows an Arakkoa being suffused with the spirit of a Kaleri, which are the little owl-like birds they keep as companions. Later on, we encounter the Arakkoa at Vale Vec, infusing crystals from the nearby Dranathist mine with dark magic and doing something suspicious involving these spooky circles of power. Then, at Vale Ruan, we learn that the Arakkoa are worshipping a figure they refer to as the Raven. We're sent to steal an amulet, which is then magically modified to let us understand Arakkoan speech, which is like pretty cool. We then hop over to Mok'Nathal, which is interestingly the only proper Arakkoan village on Outland that doesn't use the Vale prefix. We're not told explicitly why this is, but the general consensus seems to be that it's because the Arakkoa here are the only ones to worship this Raven god, which is confusing because the amulet we steal that I just mentioned comes from a harbinger of the Raven that we summon and kill at Vale Ruan. So like, you'd think that this means that the Arakkoa there also worship the Raven, but then the game seems to make a point of the Mok'Nathal Arakkoa being the only ones who worship the Raven, and that like sets them apart and makes them kind of weird. My theory is that the Arakkoa at Vale Ruan don't worship the Raven. We just did that quest there because it's one of the only other Arakkoan villages to contain a circle of power, like Vale Vec I mentioned before does, and we needed that to summon this harbinger of the Raven. Hopefully that made sense. Anyway, equipped with our magical amulet, we head over to Mok'Nathal and discover that all of this talk of the Raven is linked to a prophecy that these Mok'Nathal Arakkoa have become obsessed with. The prophecy basically says that the Raven will rise again and elevate its faithful with it, leaving the unworthy to be wingless below. The Raven used to be around, but flew too high and was struck down. And when the Raven returns, the old blood will flow and the skies will darken. So this kind of explains the mystery of the spellbook from before. The Arakkoa as we know them at this point in time are actually technically the cursed Arakkoa. They are wingless and thus cannot fly. But the Kaleri, their little bird companions, they can. They're just like normal birds. So what we saw before in that spellbook, an image of an Arakkoa being suffused with the spirit of a Kaleri, was perhaps a representation of an Arakkoa regaining the ability to fly. The Raven in the prophecy is likely referring to Anzu, who is also known as the Raven God. We actually killed Anzu during the Sethic Hall's wing of Arkandun in Terakar Forest, so I'm not feeling too confident in the validity of this prophecy. It's implied that the Mok'Nathal Arakkoa are kind of crazy for believing in this prophecy in the first place. Like, they're the only group of Arakkoa on the entire planet who are holding on to it, and by now Anzu is like 100% dead. Though, in saying that, he is like a sort of mystical figure that I feel like might have been resurrected, maybe, or the version we killed was like a summoned spirit version? I'm not sure, mostly because a lot of the lore that we have about Anzu specifically comes later on in the Warlords of Draenor expansion, but most of the events of that expansion are taking place in an alternate universe, and in this series, I'm trying to focus on what we know and is relevant at this point in the timeline, and also in our universe, and not in an alternate one. So yeah, we're not like too worried about this prophecy. However, whilst we're attempting to thin the numbers of these Arakkoa, we find an orb which shows us a vision of one of the Arakkoa corrupting an ancient. The ancients are the giant tree guys that you often see walking around night elf settlements. There's been a few in all of the Cenarion Expedition towns we've hung out in so far, and they're like super cool and lovely, so it is not nice of the Arakkoa to be corrupting them. But we are able to to do a very convoluted quest to essentially conduct tree exorcisms, ensuring the continued protection of these rare bits of greenery within the mountains. Working with the Cenarion Expedition is also how we're able to make some progress on the overall Burning Crusade storyline. If you need a reminder of the plot thus far, the heroes of Azeroth have travelled to Outland, a crumbling rock of a planet that used to be known as Draenor, in an effort to take the fight to the Burning Legion, the giant army of demons hell-bent on destroying everything in their path. Along the way, we've discovered that well-known anti-hero Illidan Stormrage is now kind of actually a villain, and it doesn't really make a lot of sense if you think about it for too long, so we're all just sort of going with it. In Hellfire Peninsula, we arrived in Outland and kicked a whole lot of demon butt, taking out forge camps and disrupting the creation of a new wave of fell orcs within Hellfire Citadel. In Zangarmarsh, we foiled the plans of Lady Vash, who was allied with Illidan Stormrage, and attempting to drain all the lakes in the region as they provide water to the rest of Outland. In Terakar Forest, we witnessed Illidan Stormrage's other buddy, Kael'thas the Sunstrider, give the order for the Blood Elves to construct devastating mana bombs that could have wiped out entire Horde and Alliance settlements. In Nagrand, we encountered more forge camps where giant fell cannons were being constructed, and we also met one of Illidan's old students, Altruis, who was firmly on team Illidan has gone nuts and needs to be stopped as much as the Burning Legion does. And now, in Blades Edge Mountains, the Cenarion Expedition is sending us to check out a bunch more forge camps and a massive portal known as Death's Door. Death's Door is actually one of a few different portals that were opened back in the day by an orc named Ner'zhul. If you're familiar with early Warcraft lore, then I'm sure you know all about him. I won't go into his entire story now. The relevant part here is that he opened a bunch of these portals across Draenor, and the magic used to open them is what tore the planet apart, causing it to become the crumbling hunk of rock we now know as Outland. If you've seen my video talking about Zangarmarsh, then you might remember I briefly mentioned a random empty portal just like sitting out in the middle of nowhere. This is another one of those portals, opened by Ner'zhul. Currently, Death's Door is the only one that's active, as the rest were all supposedly shut down by Illidan Stormrage. I think when he first came to Outland? I could be wrong. But Death's Door has been reopened by an Eridar called Baelman the Houndmaster. And now the Legion are using it to summon heaps and heaps more demons to then be teleported to their various strongholds throughout Outland. We're sent in to put a stop to all of that, taking out the demons, their teleporters, and eventually Baelman and Death's Door itself. An incredibly important, but perhaps unexpected facet of Blades Edge Mountain's history is its involvement with the Black Dragonflight. Now, we haven't really discussed dragons on this channel yet, as their involvement within Burning Crusade is pretty minimal, but we're talking about them now, and I'm very excited. So, if you're new to WoW lore, I'll try to just summarize the important bits. Back on Azeroth, there are 5 groups of dragons, the Dragonflights, who are each led by a dragon aspect, and are associated with a specific kind of power, or like element, I guess you could say. Thousands of years ago, they were known as protectors of Azeroth. However, one of the dragon aspects went a little bit crazy and betrayed everyone, and killed literally thousands of night elves and fellow dragons. We now know this guy as Deathwing, the original black dragon aspect. After this betrayal, most of the Black Dragonflight was eradicated, but Deathwing lived on. Much later on down the line, after the Horde had invaded Azeroth and all that drama was going down, Deathwing saw an opportunity to rebuild his Dragonflight, away from anyone who would stand against him. He decided to take a bunch of black dragon eggs and hide them on Draenor. I don't know why, but I'm so obsessed with this. Like, I don't know that much about Deathwing and his whole deal. Like, we'll get into that much more during his expansion. But I just love that he was like, yeah, everyone here wants to kill me, so I'm gonna go sneakily hide a bunch of eggs on another planet and then come back and get them once they hatched. I love that. That's thinking outside the box. But alas, this plan didn't quite work out as intended. You see, here in Blade's Edge Mountains, we can find a race of giants known as the Gron, who are technically like a kind of ancestor to the Ogres and the Orcs. The Gron were not keen on sharing their territory, so all the black dragons who were left behind to guard the eggs were slaughtered ruthlessly and had their bodies impaled on the giant spikes over the canyon. The specific Gron who led this slaughter was Gruul, and he then became known as Gruul the Dragon Killer. When we arrive in Blade's Edge Mountains, Gruul is sort of enacting his reign of terror along with his 7 Gron sons, who we can find in various places throughout the zone. We're gonna be coming back to Gruul and his sons in a bit, as they're very much tied to the ogre-related drama that sort of makes up the heart of this zone. In the meantime, we're still talking about dragons, because there were some black dragons who escaped the slaughter. On one of the higher plateaus in the zone, we can find the Singing Ridge. It is a beautiful area full of crystals and a lot of dragon eggs, presumably left untouched by the Gron due to being up on this ridge out of reach. However, they are no longer black dragon eggs. When the outlandification happened, I'm sure there is an actual name for that, I just keep saying outlandification because that amuses me. When that happened, there was a lot of uncontrollable and incredibly volatile energy from the Twisting Nether, just like flying around everywhere. The Twisting Nether, if you're unfamiliar, is described as the astral plane between worlds, transcending reality and time and perception. When you're in Outland and you look up at the super cool skybox and you see all of those like glowy twisty bits, those are bits of the Twisting Nether, like sort of condensed bits of Twisting Nether energy. Does this help? Is this helping? It's the same energy that ripped Draenor apart. And these dragon eggs that were left on Draenor when it shattered were infused with that energy, and the dragons within mutated, turning into nether dragons. But those aren't the only eggs that survived. This is actually something I find really funny, because the whole slaughter of the black dragons and their eggs at the hands of the Gron is made out to be a super big deal. Like, it's the reason that Gruul is named Gruul the Dragon Killer. And there's all of those dead dragons stuck up on those spikes, and it's like a really important part of the history here. But then the further you get into the quests, it's like, actually they missed so many eggs. Anyway, the other group of eggs that has been missed has been sort of adopted, I guess, by a group known as the Wyrmcult. They're a pretty random group of humans, orcs, Draenei, and Broken, and can be found often accompanied by black dragon whelplings, which are like little baby dragons. They're very cute. We encounter the Wyrmcult whilst we're helping out at Evergrove, as they've been beefing with the Cenarion Expedition as of late, unapologetically poaching the wildlife around Ruan Weald and like cutting down all of the trees. We are sent to try and negotiate with one of their leaders, Overseer Noir, who is basically like, who do you guys think you are? And doubles down on the aforementioned beefing. We end up intercepting a note addressed to Noir and take it back to Evergrove before it can be delivered. Conveniently for us, hanging out within Evergrove is a woman named Samia Inkling, who says she's here to help with the threat of the Wyrmcult on behalf of her friend, Baron Sablemane. He is very important, and we'll be coming back to him, but we need to deal with this cult first. So we show Samia this note we found to see if she recognizes who it's from. And she says that it's been signed by someone called Colphus Darkscale, who is apparently the second in command of the Wyrmcult. The note is actually an invitation to a meeting with Colphus to discuss some rather suspicious sounding plans. So we take this as an opportunity to disguise ourselves as Noir and go to this meeting at the Blackwind Coven in his stead. Whilst we're infiltrating the cult, Samia Inkling asks that we capture a bunch of whelplings to bring back to her. She claims it's for research and to help this mysterious Baron Sablemane, who she is communicating with via her own little whelpling, who seems to be flying back and forth between the two. Interesting. Our espionage attempts reveal that Colphus is planning an attack on Ruan Weald, with assistance from the nearby Arakkoa. Thinking that we are Overseer Noir because of our flawless disguise, Colphus asks that we get right on that, please and thank you. But instead, we go and kill the actual leader of the Wyrmcult, Mok'Nathal the Ashmore. who is a Draconid. Draconid are sometimes described as being half human, half dragon, but that's not entirely accurate. They're like humanoid-ish, dragon-ish guys who were made by the dragons to serve as soldiers and protectors. I was doing a bit of research into Mok'Nathal specifically because we haven't really seen many other Draconid here on Outland thus far. Like, they're definitely around on Azeroth. Even at this early point in the timeline, players would have encountered them a lot in Blackwing Lair. And apparently there are a few more hanging out in Shadowmoon Valley, our final Outland zone, under the influence of Illidan. And considering that the Draconid were created to be loyal soldiers and were often specifically tasked with protecting unhatched eggs, it makes enough sense for there to be a Draconid here in Blade's Edge Mountains, presumably left there by Deathwing to protect the eggs before Gruul got to smashing and impaling. But what's interesting here is that a few other members of the Wyrmcult, as we're battling them, have essentially a second phase of their fight where they turn into a Draconid, which is pretty crazy. Like, okay, you could dismiss this using the Drak there as an example, right? They're dragon guys that can transform from a dragon form to a human form whenever they want. But Draconid are canonically not able to do that. They're like pure dragon dude. They don't have a visage form or like a druidic ability to transform themselves from one creature to another. So the Wyrmcult have somehow developed magic to transform themselves into the creatures they worship, or into the loyal servants of the creatures they worship, which I suppose makes sense for them being a cult. Now, I believe there are instances of humans being turned into Draconid in the Cataclysm expansion, but that's like not for a few years, and is also on another planet. I want to know how the Wyrmcult figured out how to do this, and also whether or not Mok'Nathal the Ashmore, their Draconid leader, is genuinely a Draconid or not. Because he could have just been a regular member of the Wyrmcult before transforming into a Draconid. Wouldn't that be crazy? This is my big conspiracy. That was such a tangent, and probably not like super relevant. But this is one of those things that the game itself doesn't really give us a lot of information on. There's a couple more things like this I'll mention later on. So I'm really curious as to what the actual story is here. Anyway, taking out Mok'Nathal means that the Wyrmcult is no longer a threat to Ruanweald and the rest of Blade's Edge Mountains. Super cool! So now we can talk about Baron Sablemane. I love him! I love him so much! I was so excited to meet this guy because this was a big part of the context that I was missing for later parts of the game, if you know what I mean. We first meet him properly when we are attempting to put a dent in the Ogre forces. Both the Alliance and Horde separately are sort of struggling in vain with this, as one of the two groups of ogres within Blade's Edge Mountains, the Blade Spire, have been favoured by Gruul and his 7 sons, and are thus low-key kind of unstoppable. So adventurers from both factions are sent down into the canyon in search of Baron Sablemane, being told that he's wise in the ways of all sorts of exotic magics. He is such a dick when you first meet him. And I love him for that. He's talking very mysteriously and seems to have a great amount of power, but he won't tell you why. Before he can help us with the ogres and the Gron, he needs us to do some things for him first. We kill a bunch of ogres, we steal a sack of unknown contents from one of the Gron, we do some stuff with poisons. Actually, that poison stuff is the best part of the entire zone, and I mean that completely genuinely. Only the Horde get to do this specific quest, as it's tied to an important character that we'll talk about in a little bit. But basically, we're attempting to sneakily poison a bunch of the Blade Spire ogres, and we're told that we could disperse this poison to the ogres without being seen by using marmots. Marmots? I had to Google this because we don't have marmots in New Zealand. Marmots are the heaviest and largest member of the squirrel family. That's a direct quote from Wikipedia. They are so cute! So I thought this quest was going to be us sneaking around the Blade Spire camp and like releasing groups of marmots to help spread the poison. But no, we control a marmot. We become a marmot. And it is the best part of this entire zone. And also, it is the worst part, because I was so busy freaking out at how cute my marmot is that I managed to get him killed very quickly. But the ability to turn yourself into a marmot for this quest is on a 6-minute cooldown. I had to sit there and wait for 6 minutes before I could attempt this quest again. What the f***? Anyway, we kill a bunch of ogres, and eventually Baron Sablemane agrees to team up with us to take down one of the strongest of Gruul's 7 sons, a Gron called Gok. Baron Sablemane tells us that the reason he's willing to help us at all is because he actually has some very personal beef with Gruul and the Gron. Apparently, they slaughtered his people and his children, and now he wants revenge. Interesting. Now, killing Gok is meant to be a really climactic part of the story. It's a very big moment that is integral to the overall narrative of Blade's Edge Mountains and contains the big reveal of Baron Sablemane's true identity. And I cannot stress enough how important this moment is. So imagine my bewilderment when I got to what I was pretty sure was meant to be the moment we get this big reveal and climactic moment, and it simply does not happen. I don't know if the game bugged or if I just killed Gok too quickly to give Baron Sablemane time to do all of his dialogue, but none of what was meant to happen actually happened. I just killed Gok and turned in the quest, and that was it. I was very confused. But thanks to the power of the internet and copious research, I am still equipped to tell you what went down. Or what was meant to go down. So we head to the altar of Gok, and we summon the Gron to challenge him. Gok comes out and is like, okay, who woke me up? I was napping. And then Baron Sablemane appears and is like, oh, 'twas I. And we're sitting there like, well, 'twas actually I, but sure, you can have your moment. Baron Sablemane is waffling on about how his name will be on Gok's lips as he gasps his dying breath, which is actually pretty cool. So then we're fighting him, and Baron Sablemane is helping, and as Gok gets closer to his demise, Baron Sablemane loses it and yells out, saying, your father destroyed my children and left their bodies impaled upon the rocky blades at Dragon's Edge. For this you will die. Enough of this farce. Prepare to face my full wrath. And then he transforms into a giant black dragon and kicks Gok's ass. Whoa! So yeah, Baron Sablemane was in fact Sablemane, the black dragon, the whole time. Sablemane, as you probably know if you've played Dragonflight, goes on to play a hugely important role in this story years later. But at this point in time, a lot less is known about him. Obviously, he's a black dragon, but he is seemingly free from the corruption that plagued Deathwing and much of the rest of his Dragonflight. He is also seemingly not associated with the Wyrmcult, as he had sent Samir Inkling, who at this point we can assume is also a black dragon, to help us take them down. Though it is possible that either Samir or Sablemane, or even both of them, were associated with the cult at one point, as, if you recall, Samir does recognize Kolfus Darkscale as being the second in command of the cult. Apparently, Sablemane was able to somehow survive Gruul's massacre, and in the wake of the near-total destruction of his Dragonflight, he is intent upon rebuilding his brood and leading the Black Dragons into a new age free of the corruption of his father. Starting with the Whelplings that we helped gather at Samir's behest. When we meet him again to hand in the quest after killing Gok, he asks that we keep his true identity a secret. It's not stated why he asks this of us, but if you're familiar with the turbulent history of the Black Dragonflight, then it's not hard to guess. This is the last we see of Sablemane until Dragonflight, 15 years later, where his appearance sort of surprises everyone back on Azeroth, as there are very few people who actually know of his existence, let alone his true identity. Remember how I mentioned during the Marmot quest that it was tied to a pretty important character? Well, That character is Rexxar. Rexxar's here! I was so excited about this. For me, personally, on my journey of learning a lot of this lore for the first time, Rexxar was another one of those characters that I definitely recognized and appreciated, but didn't actually know the details of his backstory or what role he plays in the story, other than just like being super cool. So, the most important thing you need to know about Rexxar is that he is half orc, half ogre. His people were not a part of the Horde originally, preferring to stay out of the conflict raging across Draenor back in the day. But Rexxar himself wanted more for his life and left his people behind to join the Horde, eventually following them to Azeroth, and playing a pretty important role throughout the events of Warcraft 3. His whole vibe, basically, is that he's like fully a part of the Horde and is super loyal to Thrall and everything, but he's also like 100% on his own journey, you know? And very connected with the wild. He's a hunter and is very close with his animal companions. In this case, that's Misha, a giant bear who is just like chilling at his feet, having a nap. It's very cute. We meet Rexxar at Thunderlord's Stronghold, which is an orcish town across the canyon from Sylvanar. Horde adventurers go on a few quests here, which I'll talk about in a little bit, but eventually we're pointed in Rexxar's direction, being told that he needs help reconnecting with his ancestors. As we head over to talk to Rexxar, he tells us that he's returned to Outland in search of the rest of his people, the other half-orc, half-ogres, known as the Mok'Nathal. And we're able to tell him that Mok'Nathal village is like literally right over there, like just to the east. But Rexxar suddenly gets all shy and apprehensive. It's been years since he's seen them, and he doesn't know whether they'll welcome him back. So he's sending us over there instead to see if we can go find this guy he knows called Leorox and tell him what's up. So we hop on our Dragonhawk and zoom over there, finding Leorox presiding over the whole village as its leader. We go chat to him and are like, hey, do you know my buddy Rexxar? And Leorox is like, Rexxar? You mean my son, Rexxar? Yeah, he's not welcome here anymore. So we fly back to Rexxar and are like, hey, what the f, dude? And Rexxar is like, yeah, okay, I thought that might have been the case. And explains that yes, indeed, Leorox is his father, and he probably should have told us that first. Leorox was never a fan of Rexxar's plan to join the Horde, but Rexxar tells us that his dad also never really gave him a reason to stay. But he wants to repair that relationship now. And what better way to do this than to help the Mok'Nathal with all of their issues? Horde adventurers, Loriandril in this case, are sent to help the Mok'Nathal with the nearby Arakkoa, specifically the ones at Vale Vec, messing around with all of the crystals, while simultaneously working on Rexxar's behalf to link up with Baron Sablemane and alleviate some of the ogre-based pressure on the clan. But whilst we're doing all of these quests, Leorox is like hardcore staring at us the whole time. Like literally we go and pick up a quest from him and the quest text begins by saying, Leorox looks at you in the eye with the kind of stare that chills your soul. Dude, real weird vibe, but oh, okay. Despite our attempts to build rapport with the rest of the group, Leorox insists that we still don't understand the Mok'Nathal, and that we won't be able to until we have struggled like they have. Bold thing to say to a blood elf, you know, a group that has faced one of the biggest tragedies in Warcraft history. But I can concede that life for the Mok'Nathal has hardly been a walk in the park. They have faced discrimination from both sides of their heritage, neither group wishing to welcome the half-breeds into their midst. They were even almost completely massacred at one point by one of the orcish leaders back in the Draenor days, but Rexxar put a stop to that. Or that might have just been an alternate universe Draenor. I'm not sure. Despite our efforts, Leorox is still not convinced that we are a true warrior, which is actually very astute on his part, as we are clearly a mage. So he sends us basically on a bunch of trials to prove our worthiness in his eyes. And I guess also Rexxar's worthiness. This is a very daddy issues centered part of the story, just like with Garrosh in the Grand. And by the end of it, Leorox says that maybe he was wrong about us. But he's like very reluctant to actually commit to that sentiment. Nonetheless, he does say that we should be proud of what we've achieved, which is nice. And then a bunch of Mok'Nathal spirits appear to express their gratitude, which is lovely, but also kind of bittersweet, because this whole time, Rexxar is back at Thunderlord's stronghold, still not feeling like he's welcome within his own clan. Alright, enough dancing around it. It is time to talk about the ogres. Because literally everything we do here in Blade's Edge Mountains is tying in with these ogres somehow. Like, the Cenarion Expedition are constantly trying to push back the ogre forces and keep them down in the canyon away from Sylvanar and Evergrove. The Black Dragonflight were literally eradicated by the ogres and the Gron. And every friendly town we visit, like Thunderlord's Stronghold and Mok'Nathal Village, are essentially like backed into a corner because the ogres and the Gron rule over the entire Daggermore Canyon. As mentioned before, there are two ogre clans here in Blade's Edge. The Bladespire, who have gained the favour of Gruul the Dragon Killer and are bolstered by the force of his 7 sons, and the Bloodmaul, who are actually facing total annihilation because ogres are very territorial. I mean, we saw what we did to the dragons when they showed up. It's hardly surprising to find them fighting each other down in the canyon. It's in the middle of this conflict that we find Mogdorg, an ogre from the Bloodmaul clan, who asks that we help save them. Now, it might seem kinda crazy for us to consider teaming up with the ogres after we've spent literally our whole time in Blade's Edge Mountains trying to take them down in one way or the other, but Mogdorg asks that we hear him out. The ogres aren't that great, sure, but what's worse, genuinely, are the Gron. Gruul and his 7 sons are a threat to everyone. Cenarion Expedition, Alliance, Horde, dragons. Like, they need to be taken care of. And the ogres themselves aren't inherently evil. I mean, they're literally like ancestors to the orcs. You can find friendly ogres all over the place. The Bloodmaul clan just want to get rid of the Gron and reclaim their land. And we can help them with that, because at this point, 3 of Gruul's 7 sons have been killed. Gok, who we killed with Baron Sablemane, along with Gorgrom the Dragon Eater, who I didn't mention at the time because it wasn't like a big climactic fight scene, but Baron Sablemane gives us like a poison thing to kill him, I think, maybe. Also, Dern the Hungerer, who was for some reason running around in Nagrand, like outside Oshugun, and was thus killed back when we were questing there. I didn't include that in the video because I thought it was just like a random side quest with no importance to the storyline at all. It doesn't mention how important Dern the Hungerer is in the quest text when you get it. It's just like a wanted poster, but regardless, he's dead now. So that's 3 of Gruul's 7 sons, now already out of the picture, and Mogdorg sends us off to deal with the rest. I believe these are technically group quests and would have felt far more intense and climactic back in the actual Burning Crusade expansion, but thanks to this being retail WoW and Zerylin being the bad bitch he is, I was able to handle these Gron pretty easy peasy. First, we're taking out Grulok, then Magok, then we head to Terakar to take out Slug? I think Slag is funnier. But this is when I got to experience the bug that, as far as I know, is still in the game, where part of Terakar and Nagrand are just, like, missing the ground texture. Hey, what? Anyway, the final son that we are sent to kill is Skullock Soulgrinder, who has somehow at some point been trained by a warlock to do necromancy. Okay. So we're like freeing a bunch of cursed spirits and then having to kill a bunch of cursed spirits before we can actually kill Skullock himself. And with all 7 sons taken care of, that only leaves Gruul left to kill. Gruul's lair is the only instance in the zone, and is a 2-boss raid that can be found right at the back of the Daggermore Canyon, guarded by the strongest Bladespire ogres in the mountains. There's never actually any point, like within the questing, that we're directed into the raid, but I feel like this is the most fitting place to experience it, right after taking out the 7 sons. The first boss within is High King Mulgar, who we haven't actually heard of until now, but is actually the reason for the Bladespire clan being favoured by Gruul and the Gron. Mulgar was apparently asked to demonstrate his strength before the previous king of the ogres, and he did so by snapping that king's neck. Gruul heard about this display and, like, adopted the Bladespire, basically, and now Mulgar serves as Gruul's right-hand man. But both Mulgar and Gruul are ultimately taken down by our heroes, and the fate of Blade's Edge Mountains is left in the hands of the Bloodmaw and the Black Dragonflight. We return now to Mordog to report our success, and he, I shit you not, crowns us as King of the Ogres. We have spent this entire zone, it's a big f***ing zone too, I don't know if you've noticed how long this video is, we've spent the whole thing killing incomprehensible numbers of ogres, only for us to now be crowned as king of the ogres? What the f***? Also, it's really cool. Like, I was so confused that this is what was happening, but somehow it was done really well. Like, Mordog gives a big speech, and then you turn around, you're like at the top of a big tower chatting to him, you turn around, and there's all of the Bloodmaw ogres standing beneath you, cheering, and then kneeling before you, because you're the king now. And then Mordog tells us we're going to ogre heaven. But he doesn't mean that, like, we're the king of the ogres now, so when we die we are worthy of reaching ogre heaven, like a Valhalla sort of situation. Nah, he means we're actually going to an actual place actually thought of as ogre heaven right now. Okay. So ogre heaven is also known as Ogrila, and it's sick as It's right up on a ridge that you can only access with a flying mount, and it's all like hazy, but also like bright and glowy and covered in these crystals that at first I assumed were more Dranathist crystals. I think I mentioned them just before. There's like a mine down in the canyon called the Dranathist mine where you find all of these crystals. But the Ogrila crystals are not Dranathist crystals. They're Apexis crystals. Now, I haven't played much of Warlords of Draenor. Technically, I have a garrison. That's about it. When it was current content, I was still leveling up my Death Knight through probably BC and Wrath content, actually. But I was like present enough in online WoW culture at the time to hear Apexis crystals when I reached Ogrila and have like a full body reaction. I literally wrote like, oh no, in my notes as I was playing. They're a currency, right? Like a super grindy one. That's the association I have in my head. And what do you know, that's exactly what they are here as well. It's interesting lore though. So the Apexis were an ancient Arakkoan civilization that were like super powerful and magical and could fly, and ultimately met their downfall kind of because of Apexis crystals. They're very potently magical, and one of the factions of Apexis Arakkoa were hoarding them. And the other faction found out, and there was a bit of like a civil war, I believe, and the whole society collapsed. So these crystals are a big deal. And their magic has made all of the ogres here at Ogrila super intelligent, which is very fun. The quests that we do at Ogrila are all like repeatable dailies to increase reputation with the Ogrila faction to get cool rewards and stuff. You know, typical post-leveling WoW stuff. So rather than going into detail about all of those, I thought I'd instead tell you about some of the other side quests and interesting locations here in Blade's Edge Mountains, just to round out our experience before we get into the end. I love Toshley Station. Oh my god. This is a little town just past the Razor Ridge. A lot of places in this zone are called the something ridge, and it's made up entirely of gnomes who were kicked out of Sylvanar because their technological experiments were like messing with the druidic vibes of the Living Grove. I love that. It's led by Toshley, who is very proud of the industrial haven that he has built, claiming it's way better than what those stuffy elves had going on. He actually calls them stuffy. I love that! This town is such a hoot. I love gnomes, man. Like, I'm probably more of an elf person myself, but like, I appreciate a good gnome. You know, people hate on them because they're goofy and like they can be kind of annoying. But I love them, and I love this town. There's gnomes running around, performing dangerous experiments, getting set on fire, and there's a bunch of like sci-fi references in NPC and quest names. It's so much fun, and it is also one of the only fully gnome settlements in the entire game. Alliance adventurers help the gnomes here with various experiments, whether it be gathering materials, filling power sources, or actually being test subjects ourselves and being essentially shot out of a cannon across the zone. It's very cool. Thunderlord Stronghold, as mentioned before, is an orcish town where we find Rexxar hanging out and brooding. The stronghold used to be home to the Thunderlord clan, but was abandoned after all of the orcs had gone demon blood mode. Check out the Nagrand video if you want some more details on that. Eventually, it was taken over and ransacked by the Ogres, but the returning Horde forces who have come through the Dark Portal once more have reclaimed it and are wanting to honor the original Thunderlord clan by returning the stronghold to its former glory. We end up discovering a bunch of Thunderlord clan artifacts that had been stolen by the Ogres, and as we return them to Thunderlord Stronghold, we are visited by the spirits of Thunderlord ancestors who say that securing the artifacts has appeased them and has earned the right for the Horde to inhabit this village. There are ethereals here. They don't play too big of a role. It's mostly side quest stuff, but I thought I'd mention them here, mostly because ethereals are cool, and I feel like everyone likes ethereals. However, these are not the friendly ethereals of the consortium that we met in Nagrand. Rather, these are Razani ethereals, who have been combining pure energy with souls. Specifically, the souls of gnomes from Toshli Station and souls of the Mok'Nathal. Not great, as far as experimentations go. We're eventually able to retrieve this very cool looking box that is apparently the collection of souls and return it to either Toshli Station or Mok'Nathal Village after we defeat Nexus Prince Razan. I think this is very interesting, largely because we are never given any more information about what the ethereals were actually trying to do here. But ethereals themselves are a result of what happens when you combine beings with souls with an incredible amount of energy. Like, obviously there's more to it than that, but when you take away their enchanted wrappings, ethereals are beings of pure energy that have retained their sentience and humanity and their souls. So with these experiments, the ethereals' attempts to reproduce, to create more beings like themselves, I think it's so interesting, and we literally never learn anything more about it. Anyway. This is normally the part of the video where I discuss the themes of the zone and what I thought it meant and how it made me feel, and I will do that, but first I want to come back to our initial question. Is Blades Edge Mountains a bad zone? I spent a while looking into this, reading what people on the internet had to say about it, and I condensed the general complaints down into 4 points. Number 1, it sucks to level in. Number 2, it's horrible to navigate. Number 3, it's visually bland. And number 4, it has boring quest design. Can I be so honest? I don't agree with any of those points. I really genuinely don't. Now, okay, some of that is because I am playing through all of this on retail WoW, on modern characters with good gear and access to skywriting. The introduction of time walking means that leveling isn't really a concern in any of these old zones anymore. And in terms of all the navigation issues, there is still quite a bit of back and forth between quest locations, but that's the case with every Outland zone. I believe a lot of the original complaints about the zone's navigability, is that a word? Navigability, come from having to run around with a ground mount, which I will 100% concede would suck to do in this zone. So that kind of renders the first 2 points invalid. to me at least, just based on the game itself progressing over time and making quality of life improvements. But the other 2 points are ones that we can actually talk about. How does Blade's Edge Mountains hold up these days in terms of its visual aesthetic and its quest design? First, the aesthetics. A lot of the complaints I saw described the zone as being bland and boring and just all like brown and spiky and blah. It's not! Like, there is a lot of that, sure, but there is loads of variety once you actually get into the zone. Compare Daggermore Canyon to Ruan Weald, to Toshley Station, to Death's Door, to Ogrila. It's genuinely more variety than I think any other zone in Outland. Personally, I think all of the big spiky bits, the areas around the canyon, are just so cool. It's such a unique and distinctive aesthetic that you can't find anywhere else in the game. When you're down there in the canyon and you have all of these huge spikes towering over you, some with literal dragon corpses impaled on them, it gives the sense that the walls are closing in around you, and as you work desperately to take down the ogres and the grons, it gives the whole area a sense of urgency and claustrophobia. And then the quest design. Blade's Edge Mountains has boring quest design. What? No, it doesn't! I think it actually has some of the most unique and experimental quest design we've seen thus far. Like, a lot of it can end up feeling a little bit clunky compared to what we're used to these days, but it almost seems like they're trying a bunch of things here that we then see implemented properly in later expansions. For example, the Marmot quest. It was basically a typical vehicle quest, which I don't think became a thing really until Wrath? Maybe? Similarly, in Death's Door, you have a little ability to summon the quest giver to you, kind of emulating the quests we often see these days where the quest giver follows your character around. There's memory puzzles and bombing missions and even stealth missions at the Forge camps and with the Wyrmcult where you have to put on a disguise and then avoid the specific NPCs that are able to see through it, kind of like in Suramar. There's a few other examples throughout the zone, and all of them feel like kind of proofs of concept, and I think it's so good. It feels like a zone that the quest designers had a lot of fun with and does not read as boring to me at all. One thing I didn't see anyone complain about was the lore, which is nice. And some of that might be because people just don't read the quest text as intensely as I tend to do. But I mean, I think it makes sense regardless. I thought all of the lore was amazing. I always enjoy getting to really explore the world building of another race, like the ogres in this case, and having so much of the zone dedicated to unpacking their whole situation meant that we got a lot of lore we otherwise wouldn't have time for in a typical zone. There's also a bunch of smaller moments that really get you thinking, like the contrast between the Cenarion Expedition and Toshley Station. It's bringing in themes of industrialization versus conservation, which is always something I'm thrilled to see explored in-game. The quests with Thunderlord Stronghold, Rexxar, and the Mok'Nathal built off the stories in Nagrand with the Magar by exploring legacy and family and forgiveness. At the end of the day, I can understand why people didn't like this zone when it first came out. The inability to get around easily and the leveling considerations of BC would have been a lot more front of mind back then. But playing through the zone now in modern day retail WoW was genuinely a wonderful experience. So if anyone watching hasn't played the zone since BC, and especially if you've considered yourself not a fan of it for any of the reasons mentioned in this video, I highly recommend giving it another chance. It might surprise you. Thank you so much for watching. As always, an extra special thank you to my lovely channel members and patrons. If you want to support me and the channel, I've got a link in the description to the Patreon, or you can become a channel member right here on YouTube. YouTube memberships have an additional cheaper tier than Patreon, as Patreon has a $5 minimum, so keep that in mind if you are wanting to support. Next time we'll be looking at Netherstorm, which I have already started playing and I have been loving so far. In the meantime, I'll be posting more transmog videos and more of my Sim series, so stay tuned for those. Hope you're all having a lovely day. Yeah, that's all. Bye!